Hello there. Let me get myself set up. So, my name is Laura Sullivan, and I like to tell stories. So I hope you're up for a couple of stories this morning. The one I want to talk about is about the power of people to change things. Now, I was introduced as the director to We Move Europe, a campaigning organization. In fact, I left a month ago, but I still have worked the last 5 years there and have been observing how people have been really taking action to change things for the better on this planet. So when your co-student Marek got in touch and gave me the brief of cause and effect, what I propose to talk about is what's the cause of people getting up off the sofa and going out there and trying to change things for the better? And then what's the effect when they do that? So that's the kind of story I want to talk about today. Here are some of those people who are getting out there. There's an awful lot of climate justice students out there in this world today, and the photo on the right is a huge demonstration of people in Romania in 2019 encouraging people to go out and vote in the European elections, where the turnout in the vote had been very low, but massively increased in 2019. Now, I want to talk to you about some reasons why people really get out there and take action and really do activism. You might have heard that word. I count myself as an activist, and sometimes people go, she's an activist, watch out. Because for some people, the word activist has an aggressive connotation. It sounds like she's about to chain herself to a tree so that it doesn't get cut down. But in fact, activism encapsulates lots of different things that people do in the name of change. So one of the reasons people get out there is that they know change is possible because they've seen it happen before. And as it's written here, the future is unwritten. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or next year or in the next 10 years. And in that uncertainty is a huge space of hope, because if people do get out there to try to move things, then things move. Another reason people get involved in trying to change things is that they want to feel belonging to a group or a community. When I was at We Move these last 5 years, it's a community of about 1 million people scattered all across Europe, speaking many different languages, and who do things like sign petitions, fund actions, call their member of the European Parliament or their member of Parliament, send postcards, get on Twitter, etc. Some of them do all of those things all of the time. And I would ring those people up and go, why are you so active? Why are you doing all of these things? And some of the reasons that they answered was, well, I know there's other people out there like me who care and who want to act in the name of nature, in the name of climate, in the name of justice, in the name of getting rid of poverty on this planet, for example. So that's another reason people do this. Another reason, again, is that people know that united we are stronger. When you get together in groups, there's a bigger chance that you can make positive change happen. This is me and a group of my friends and colleagues from a movement called We Brussels. And back in 2018, we came together to organize a conference in the Kai Theater in Brussels, bringing together people from different cities, Barcelona, Paris, Amsterdam, to talk about how can we change this city that we love for the even better. How can we, for example, deal with inequality and poverty in the city of Brussels, where inequality really is a very big issue. Another reason people take action is that they want to be heard. I hear this all the time. People who are frustrated because, you know, they see so much war, so much climate change, so many problems with floods or droughts, and they say, I really want my opinion to be heard on this. Another reason is they want a future, and not just for themselves, but also for their kids and their grandkids. I remember speaking to a granddad in Germany, and I asked him, I said, wow, when I look at your sort of record online, you've done all the things related to climate change. Why are you so motivated by this subject? And he said, well, I've 2 granddaughters in Germany, and I want them to have a planet in future, and that's why I do this. And there are many more people like that person. another reason again is that people want justice and fairness. Now, this is a group of entirely inspiring 14 to 19-year-olds who a few years ago, that's the European Parliament. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. It's the third floor. I'm seeing some nodding. And it's where a lot of the people pass through, the cafes over there, the way outs over there, and they organized a sit-in with We Move. So we helped them to get into the Parliament, and they said, we're going to sit down here in this space where everyone has to, go towards the exit, and we're not going to move until we can speak to some representatives, some members of the European Parliament, about the climate action that we want to see. And guess what happened? The leader of the second biggest party in the Parliament came down and organised a spontaneous meeting with them to listen to them on their views on climate justice. There's another reason, which is sometimes, my voice is going, sometimes people take action because they have no other choice. They get off the sofa because they're worried that there will be no sofa in future. Now, this particular story, and I said I was going to tell some stories, this is one of them, is from Serbia. And this is a very brave group of people who took on one of the world's biggest mining companies, Rio Tinto. Rio Tinto made $10 billion in profits after tax last year, and they wanted to take a parcel of land that would affect 19,000 people in the Jadar Valley in Serbia. It was shown that when they would extract the lithium that they wanted to take from underneath their land, that the processes in order to extract that required a lot of chemicals, and those chemicals were going to have irreversible impacts on the water, the air, and the land. Obviously, if you lived in that community, you'd do something about it, right? So that group of people got together with the organization I was working with, We Move Europe, and many other local groups, and basically said, no, we don't accept this. We're not going to allow for this to happen. They got in the media, they did demonstrations, they did all kinds of disruptive actions that some people would find very uncivilized, but they did that because it mattered so much they had no other choice. And guess what? They won. The Serbian government withdrew the permit for Rio Tinto to take this land. Now, this is an amazing victory, and it's always a bit tenuous. You never know if it's going to stick, because if the government changes, will they reverse this? So these people are going to be keeping an eye on this situation. And actually, the activist on the right there, Bojana, is in Brussels tonight for the launch of a book on land grabbing, because she's working with activists around the world who are experiencing the same thing in many countries around the world. Now, here's to some of the more good stories. This slide is a little bit too detailed in the sense that there are three massive stories here. But what's the effect when people go out and try to change things for the better? This story on the left, this picture depicts a scene of slavery, and the story I want to talk to you about is actually represented also by this book that I brought as a prop, because it marks the end of the slave trade. In fact, slavery is now abolished in every country in the world, although there are still practices around the world. But in particular, between the 1500s and the 1800s, 2 million Africans died either on the way being kidnapped from the west coast of Africa and being transported to the Americas and the Caribbean to work on plantations of sugar, tobacco, and other things. But 12 million of them were basically kidnapped and sold into slavery as products. Can you imagine if you were thought of as a product or a cargo instead of as a person with rights? And in that time, between the 1500s and even up to the 1800s in England, the view was that slaves were simply part of the economy. This was just a thing that you did. And in fact, 3/4 of the world population at that time were in some form of bondage, which means you're not free to go, you are not safe, and you are under control of your employer. So can you imagine a state like that? At that time, around the end of the 1700s, a group of people involving lawyers, people from the Quaker movement, one woman and one freed slave, put together a campaign, and they took 30 years to get to 1807, when finally the slave trade was abolished in the UK, not in the rest of the world. The rest of the world was happening after that, and even before that in Haiti, actually, is an amazing story. If you get a chance at some stage, this book, Bury the Chains, is amazing on this topic. But all this to say that this happened because of the brave efforts of people who said, hang on a second, this is not right. I care about human rights. I'm going to do something about it. The middle story may resonate. For some of you, it's about the right to vote of women. In Belgium, women were first allowed to vote in 1949. In Switzerland, it was 1971. And in Portugal, it was 1976. That was 3 years before I was born. It's not that long ago. I'm not that old. But essentially, this right for women to vote is very new. And the reason that it happened was because women got involved in what was considered at the time of some very uncivilized stuff. So they would chain themselves to railings, they would break windows, they would get arrested. In prison, they would go on hunger strike. Some of them lost their lives to this, and basically we now as women have our vote because they fought so hard at that time. The third photo is a photo which represents, is from the Apartheid Museum in South Africa, in Johannesburg. And apartheid means apartness. It was a system from the 1940s to the 1990s that essentially kept blacks and whites apart, and meant that if you were not white, you had an awful lot less rights. You couldn't go on buses with white people, you had to go through different doors, you couldn't marry with someone who was white, there was an awful lot more you couldn't do. It was very violent for them. And because of the actions of a very brave and committed group of people over 50 years, who started with petitions and writing letters and trying to reason with people, but over time had to scale up those actions because otherwise they were never going to get their rights and their freedom. But they won it in the early 90s. And some of you may have heard of Nelson Mandela, who a little bit represents that movement and is one of the greatest activists we've ever known. So I want to also just bring you a more recent story of change. Now, this is from my previous employer, We Move Europe, and if humans have rights, shouldn't nature have rights too? This campaign involves a kind of a complicated sounding word, ecocide, but it's not that complicated. Eco means oikos, or home, and the side represents killing. So ecocide is the killing of our home, or the killing of the planet. It is now, since last year, against the law. There is a European law, which means that companies cannot destroy nature. If they do, they face prison sentences and they have to pay very big fines. So for example, if BP, the massive oil company, drops a load of oil in the ocean just outside us there, they will be liable for penalties, essentially. And this did not exist before, and it's happened because of hundreds of thousands of people who signed petitions, made calls to members of the European Parliament, and a group of particularly brave people who did some quite disruptive action around the Commission last April in postering, even all over the Berlaymont building, ecocide is a crime, this needs to stop. And we won. Getting to the end, this is the Town Hall of Madrid in 2015. Refugees welcome. I don't know that it's there anymore. The government has changed. It may not be the case. But Refugees Welcome is essentially a movement that's saying refugees are people, they have rights, and they're welcome. And this, for me, is a symbol of great hope, of people who are willing to speak out for other people, to say, you are welcome. And it feels sometimes like cities are much braver than our nation states and the European Union, which unfortunately at the moment is paying off a lot of other governments to take in refugees and migrants, such as Libya, which doesn't have a very good record on human rights. So big questions about, and I'm very worried about how the European Union is treating refugees and migrants, but I'm very hopeful about some cities and how they have been much more welcoming. I'm getting to the end now, so just second last slide, what kinds of things, to make this a bit more real, like what kind of activism do people do? Well, they sign petitions, they give money, so they crowdfund actions. So when we did those massive posters everywhere in the Schumann area to try to get through to decision makers, that was crowdfunded by thousands of people. They join demonstrations. Often people are quite cynical about demonstrations, saying, that's just a load of people walking down the street. Well, when you get a lot of people walking on the street, that's when the media pay attention, and that's when also decision makers pay attention. So I do hope you will be joining demonstrations, or already have. They talk to journalists to get in the news. They meet their members of the European Parliament. This is really important, actually. Sometimes we think, you know, wow, they're so busy, etc. But it's very important to meet your members of the European Parliament to tell them what you think about different issues. They get involved in different disruptive actions that's slightly cut off by the picture, but it says, for example, stop private jets. And stop private jets, there have been a number of actions at airports around Europe recently. I don't know if you've noticed. There was one in Amsterdam not so long ago. In Amsterdam, the main airport is called Schiphol. Maybe some of you have been there. And in 2022, it was had the highest responsibility for emissions in the Netherlands. So activists in the Netherlands went to a specific private jet and basically chained themselves to it. They wouldn't move, and they said, until you get rid of private jets, we're not going to move. And that was because they know that it doesn't make sense, number one, really to fly anymore, and we really need to minimize that, but it particularly does not make sense to send off a plane with 2 or 3 people in it. So this is pretty brave action. Sometimes they chain themselves to banks, as happened in Spain some years ago, when the banks were kicking people out of their apartments and homes when they weren't able to pay their mortgages, but still requiring them to pay the mortgages after they were kicked out. They often form human shields. I've seen this in Glasgow. Was it Glasgow? It was in Scotland not so long ago, where somebody's application for refugee status had been rejected. And the neighbours and the friends and the school colleagues literally formed a human shield around this person so that he couldn't be removed from Scotland, which is amazing. So there's all kinds of different things, from very simple, signing a petition, giving some money, sharing a tweet, to really, as I said, the much more sort of brave stuff. This is my last slide. So what I'm trying to say here is the future is in our hands, and the planet is in our hands. And people and planet are completely interconnected. We won't survive if the planet doesn't survive. But likewise, it would be very nice if human beings, and particularly those who are now most sort of, badly treated in society, were doing better. So the good news is this: all of the bad stuff that we see in the news, the roots of it is in systems that have been created, that have been man-made. And those systems can be man, woman, children, everyone, unmade. And whether it's the economic system that has certain rules that mean the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer, or a democratic system that's not imaginative enough to take everyone into account, or a food system that is destroying soil through pesticides and destroying the rights of farmers. You may have been interested in the news recently, seeing the farmers protesting. Interestingly, about, the largest proportion of farmers in Europe have only 5 hectares of land. But unfortunately, it's not those that are destroying the planet, but they are really struggling to be able to make a living. They should be heard, but not the agribusiness that is often really dominating the narrative on a lot of this. So the systems can be changed, but they never will unless people speak out, unless people care, and not just care, but get up off the sofa and do something about it. So folks, I'm really hopeful that your generation, as the generations before you, are going to get out there and do something about it. Thank you very much.